In an unexpected and deeply emotional moment, Hollywood legend Denzel Washington broke down in tears during a live TV appearance after receiving a surprise call from Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré. What was said during the call left the audience and viewers around the world stunned. The exchange showed that true leadership and respect can cross borders, cultures, and fame. It had started as a regular late-night talk show. The audience cheered as Denzel walked onto the stage, smiling and calm, the picture of legendary grace. The host welcomed him with energy, shared jokes, and played clips from his latest role. But behind Denzel's warm laughter, there was a certain quiet in his eyes, as if his thoughts were somewhere else. Halfway through the show, the host grinned and announced that they had a surprise for him, a live call from someone very far away. Denzel blinked, confused, and asked what kind of surprise it was. Then, the screen behind him lit up, showing the flag of Burkina Faso. A quiet murmur spread through the audience. A respectful and gentle voice came through the speakers. "Good evening, Mr. Washington. This is Ibrahim Traoré, president of the transition of Burkina Faso." Denzel froze. The room fell completely silent. For the first time in the show's history, nothing could be heard except for one man's breath caught in his throat. No one had expected what happened next. The audience stared, holding their breath as Denzel's hands began to tremble. The president spoke in calm but heartfelt English, his voice touched with a French accent. He shared that Denzel didn't know him, but when Ibrahim was 14 years old, he was just a barefoot boy in Burkina Faso who saw Denzel in glory. Ibrahim said, "I saw a black man not begging, not afraid, but strong and crying for justice." Denzel blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Ibrahim recalled how that night he had told his mother, "One day, I'll fight for people too, like him." The host looked stunned. Denzel covered his mouth as Ibrahim continued. He said that years later, when his people needed someone to stand up, he remembered Denzel's strength, his words, and his eyes. He admitted he didn't stand because he was fearless, but because he had seen what courage looked like in Denzel. The room remained silent. Denzel lowered his hand, his eyes red with tears. He managed to whisper, "You're telling me I helped shape a president?" Ibrahim gently replied, "No, sir. You helped shape a man who refused to kneel to injustice." A single tear ran down Denzel's cheek as he softly said, "Thank you, my brother." The crowd gasped softly, but Ibrahim's next words were even more shocking. He said he wasn't speaking just as a president, but as a man who owed a debt. He explained that in Burkina Faso, when someone saves your soul, they never forget. Denzel shook his head humbly and said, "No, please, I didn't." But Ibrahim continued. He officially invited Denzel to be honored in Ouagadougou. More than that, he said they wanted to name a leadership school after Denzel, a place where their children could learn to stand tall, just as he had learned from watching Denzel. The audience gasped again. The host whispered, "Wow." Denzel's voice cracked as he tried to respond, "Mr. President, I don't deserve that." But Ibrahim smiled gently and said, "That's why you do." Then the screen went black as the call ended. There, on national TV, in front of millions, Denzel buried his face in his hands and sobbed, not out of sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that sometimes a single life can echo across oceans and generations. But this was only the beginning. Within 24 hours, Denzel was packing his bags. Burkina Faso was calling, and what awaited him there would shake the world. Denzel didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying Ibrahim Traoré's words over and over in his mind. His eyes stayed red long after the camera stopped rolling. By morning, social media had exploded. Denzel Traoré was trending in over 20 countries. Fans, journalists, and leaders praised the emotional moment. Some called it the most powerful TV moment in decades. While the world reacted, Denzel quietly packed his bags. It wasn't for a movie this time. It was for something that felt almost divine. He booked the next flight to Burkina Faso. There was no entourage, no spotlight, just him, a small backpack, and a heart full of emotions he couldn't even begin to describe. As the plane took off, Denzel looked out of the window and quietly whispered, "I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know I have to go." Back in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stood by a palace window, gazing out toward the runway in the distance. His aides asked him if they should prepare the press. Traoré shook his head and said, "No cameras, no speeches, just truth." Something powerful was about to happen, though neither man knew that in just 48 hours, they would both cry again, this time together. When Denzel's flight landed, there were no flashing cameras or red carpets, only silence. A black SUV waited on the tarmac. Standing beside it was a single man, dressed simply, without medals or fanfare. It was President Ibrahim Traoré. Denzel stepped out slowly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, no words were needed. They embraced, not as a star and a leader, but as two men whose lives had unexpectedly crossed across continents. Honored you came," Ibrahim said softly. Denzel replied with a faint smile. "I didn't come as a star. I came as a brother." The SUV drove them through dusty roads, passing neighborhoods, markets, and children running barefoot, waving as the car passed by. No one knew who was inside. They arrived at a simple house made of sun-worn clay and tin. "This was my home," Traoré said quietly. He opened the door. Inside, there were no guards or luxury, only old photos, a woven mat, and silence. Then, Traoré handed Denzel a wrinkled picture. In it, a young boy clung to the hand of an older woman. Traoré explained that she had raised him when his parents worked day and night. She had fed him, bathed him, and told him stories of strength. Then, in a soft voice, he added, "And she's still alive." They drove another hour through winding village roads. No one spoke much. Denzel stared at the photo of the woman, noticing her wide smile, gentle eyes, and a strength that only time could give. He asked, "Where is she now?" Traoré's jaw tightened as he said that she still worked, cleaning classrooms in a rural school. Denzel turned toward him, surprised. At 85, the president nodded and explained that she never asked for help. She always said, "God gave me legs. I'll use them till he takes them." When they arrived, the school looked worn but full of life. Children ran around barefoot, drawing in the dust with sticks. And then she appeared, bent but proud, holding a broom, the same woman from the photo. Denzel stepped out of the car, frozen. Traoré walked toward her. She looked up, and for a moment, her eyes filled with tears. "Ibrahim," she whispered. He rushed into her arms. Mom and Hawa. They wept together. Then Denzel stepped forward. She looked at him and gasped. Her hands trembled as she touched his face and said, You're him." In that quiet courtyard in Burkina Faso, time seemed to stand still. 3 souls, 3 stories, joined in one moment that would melt hearts across the world. But what came next would shake the entire nation. Mom and Hawa sat between Denzel and President Traoré under the shade of an old baobab tree. Near the school, her hands were rough, her back slightly bent, but her voice was still warm. She shared stories about young Ibrahim, how he would cry in her arms on cold nights, how he once gave her his only piece of mango so she wouldn't go hungry. Denzel listened with a softness in his eyes that the world rarely saw. Then she reached into the pocket of her old apron. "I kept this all these years," she said. She pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper with a child's handwriting. It read, "One day I will be a leader, and I will find you, Mama. I promise." Traoré gasped. He remembered writing the letter at age 9 on her birthday after she had given him her only piece of bread. Denzel wiped away a tear and said, "She held on to hope. That's the most powerful kind of faith." Suddenly, a young student ran toward them barefoot and laughing, holding a cracked plastic ball. "Mama, will you play?" he called, and she did, still barefoot, still smiling. But in that moment, something shifted inside Denzel. He realized he was no longer just visiting. Mom and Hawa said softly, "Thank you." CNN later called it the most human thing ever caught on live TV. But something even more surprising began to happen. Donations started pouring in. A simple GoFundMe page, created quietly by one of the village school students, had aimed to raise just $10,000. Within 2 hours, it had already reached $1 million. People didn't just watch, they felt, and they acted. In a world so divided, the story of a soldier's promise, a mother's love, and an actor's tears was bringing strangers together. But while the world was watching, Mom and Hawa was fading. She had one final request. By the 6th day of that unforgettable week, her body was tired. She had smiled for days, hugged dozens, and spoken with presidents and stars. But now her body was quietly telling her it was time. She knew, so she asked to see Denzel and Ibrahim privately. They came to her small room in the village, No cameras, no microphones, just 3 souls. I'm old, she said gently, her voice fragile but steady. I won't see next planning season. Both men shook their heads, urging her to rest, to stay strong. But she smiled and said, I have no fear. My only wish is that no child in Burkina Faso ever goes to school hungry. A tear slid down Traoré's cheek. She reached for Denzel's hand and told him, you tell stories that matter. The world listens to you. Tell this story. Then she took a small scarf from under her pillow. It was faded, torn, but carefully stitched. She explained that young Ibrahim had used it to tie around her arm when he played president. She placed it in Traoré's hands and whispered, my first medal, and then, with a final breath, she said, take care of each other. They held her gently as she closed her eyes. The sun outside was rising, and so was her legacy. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in silence beside her bed, still holding the scarf. The room smelled off shea butter and old books. Denzel knelt at her feet, his head bowed, his shoulders trembling. Quietly, Traoré spoke. She gave me everything when I had nothing, and now I must give everything back. He turned to Denzel, held up the scarf like a royal emblem, and said, we will build something in her name, a school, a garden, a future. Denzel looked up, his eyes swollen from crying. Yes, we will. I'll help. Outside, people had gathered. Somehow they already knew she was gone. Traoré stepped out, raised the scarf high, and said, Mama has gone to rest, but her spirit will feed generations. The crowd burst into tears. Within 12 hours, the news had spread across the globe. Burkina Faso declares National Day of Mourning for Mom, and Hawa ran the headlines. That night at a press conference, Traoré made another promise. Every child in Burkina Faso will know her name. Denzel quietly canceled all his upcoming appearances, saying, I've played kings and generals, but today I serve a mother. Next morning, the sun rose softly over Burkina Faso. In the middle of the village square stood a simple wooden casket. There were no golden statues, no velvet ropes, only flowers, drums, and silence. President Traoré walked behind the casket, alone, carrying only the scarf. Denzel followed. His suit was wrinkled from sleep, his eyes red. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. From across the world, leaders sent messages. But what touched hearts most was a small boy from Niger, who walked barefoot for 2 days just to bring a letter that said, thank you for raising our president. As the casket was lowered into the earth, the village sang. Children wept, elders clutched their chests. A bird landed on the grave and didn't move. Then something happened that no one expected. Denzel stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a necklace. It was his father's. He whispered, she reminds me of him, strong, quiet, and never asked for anything. He placed it on the grave and said, goodbye, Mama. Even the camera stopped filming. Some things are too sacred for screens. That night, President Ibrahim Traoré and Denzel Washington sat under the stars on a straw mat in total silence. The fire cracked quietly between them. They didn't need speeches. They had just buried the woman who shaped both of their lives, one with her hands, the other with her spirit. Then Traoré said, Denzel, this week I remembered who I am. Denzel nodded. Me too. In the quiet night, they made a pact. Not one written in ink, but sealed in pain, gratitude, and hope. Within hours, plans began for the Mama Hawa Foundation, a joint initiative to provide food, education, and emotional healing for rural children in Burkina Faso and beyond. And Denzel, he committed a full year's salary from his next film to it. But the most powerful part wasn't the money. It was a new short video Denzel released just before flying home. He looked into the camera and said, if one woman in a small village can raise a future president and change the heart of a Hollywood actor, then what are we waiting for? That video, 100 million views in 24 hours, and the world held its breath for what would come next. 3 days after the funeral, Denzel returned to the US quietly. No press, no fanfare. But the producers of his long-scheduled live interview insisted it had to happen. It had already been promoted across networks. Denzel agreed, but asked for one condition. Let me speak from my heart, no script. The set was bright, the audience was eager, everyone expected light talk, maybe a joke or two. But when the host asked, Denzel, you've traveled the world, what's one moment that changed your soul? He didn't answer at first. He simply pulled something from his coat pocket. It was the scarf. Then he whispered into the mic, President Ibrahim Traoré called, and I couldn't breathe after. He reminded me that that greatness isn't in awards. It's in mothers who wash your wounds and presidents who remember them. The host, visibly confused, asked, "And what did he say exactly?" Denzel's eyes watered. He slowly picked up his phone, played a voice recording, and let the room hear Traoré's words. "Thank you for honoring a woman the world forgot. But who made a man the world remembers?" And just like that, Denzel broke down in front of millions. The broadcast spread like wildfire. People paused dinner tables. Newsrooms went silent, social media froze, and the clip of Denzel sobbing, clutching the scarf while playing President Traoré's voice became the most shared video of the year. Comments poured in. "I've never cried this hard over a stranger's love. This made me want to call my mom right now." Who is Ibrahim Traoré? Because the world needs more leaders like him. Across Africa, stories of forgotten mothers began surfacing. In America, youth groups organized candlelight vigils in honor of Mama Hawa. But in Burkina Faso, something even more unexpected happened. Children across villages began writing letters, not to Santa, not to celebrities, but to President Traoré. One letter read, "If I work hard like you, will I also make my mother proud?" And Denzel, he stayed quiet after the interview. Until the next morning, he posted a photo on his Instagram of a single tree in Burkina Faso. The caption, "She watered roots that now hold up nations." No hashtags, no promotion, just truth. And the world watched and wept. Exactly 1 week after the surprise call, a statue was quietly unveiled in Ouagadougou. It wasn't of a general or a king or a president. It was of a woman holding a child's hand wrapped in a familiar scarf. A bronze plate below read, "To Mama Hawa, the mother of all leaders." President Ibrahim Traoré stood before it with Denzel Washington beside him, both holding candles. Neither spoke because some endings are too sacred for words. That night, the wind blew softly through the city. Villagers said they could feel Mama Hawa's spirit brushing against their cheeks. And in Hollywood, Denzel made one final gesture. He announced a new scholarship, the Hawa Fund, in partnership with the Burkina Faso government, dedicated to girls from rural Africa who dream of leading. As the press begged for quotes, Denzel simply said, "Some phone calls change your schedule. This one changed my soul." Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, made you cry, made you think, or reminded you of someone you love, please like, subscribe, and comment below with, "I believe in the power of love and leadership." Your words matter. Let's make stories like this travel across the world. Let's remind people that greatness is not about fame. It's about heart. Drop your thoughts below. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. And never forget, one kind act can echo across generations.